Welcome to the first episode of The Making of Pakistan, Unpacking the Roots of a Nation inspired by K.K. Aziz's seminal work, The Making of Pakistan.
Hmm,
In this series, we delve into the historical, political, and cultural forces that shaped the demand for a separate Muslim homeland in South Asia.
that's right.
In today's deep dive, we'll explore the introduction and preface sections of the book, covering up to page 15 in most editions.
Yeah, those crucial first pages.
These early pages lay the foundation for understanding Aziz's perspective on nationalism, identity, and the complex context in which the idea of Pakistan began to take shape.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to just get a handle on the core ideas he throws out right away and, the structure he's using.
Right. It's like he's giving us the blueprint before building the house.
Precisely. He's setting the stage, giving us his framework, and we're going to stick just to what's in these opening sections, the preface and introduction.
Okay, sounds good. So let's start with that structure he lays out in the preface. It's not just a straight history lesson, is it? He seems to be tackling it from different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. He tells us right up front he's looking at Muslim nationalism in Imperial India through four main lenses, four aspects.
Okay, four aspects. What's the first one?
So the first is the historical and political side. How does a group, in this case, the Muslims of India, how do they sort of evolve into thinking of themselves as a nation and then push towards having their own state?
Ah, the journey to statehood.
Exactly. He says that's what chapters 1, 2, and 3 are all about, the timeline, the political moves.
Got it. So that's the narrative part, more or less. What's the second angle?
The second aspect is what he calls the philosophical justification, basically the why. What reasons does the group give for needing to be separate?
Okay, the arguments.
Right. And for Aziz, this really centers on religion and culture as the core reasons for that distinct identity and the political goals that come with it. Chapters 4 and 5 dig into that.
Makes sense. History first, then the ideas behind it. And the third aspect, it feels like it shifts focus a bit.
It does, yeah. The third is the psychological dimension. How does that feeling of being one people, one nation, actually develop?
Oh, interesting. Like the internal glue.
Kind of. He looks at things like shared pride, the symbols, and maybe even myths that unite people, and how that feeling of solidarity grows. That's chapter 6.
Pride, symbols, myths. That feels really important. It suggests nationalism isn't just about laws and borders, but about how people feel together.
Definitely. And that leads to the final piece of his structure, the fourth angle.
Look at you.
That's the theory itself, specifically the two-nation theory. The core intellectual argument used to justify Pakistan. He tackles that head-on in chapter 7.
Okay.
And he also quickly mentions, like you said, the introduction defines terms, which we're getting into, and an epilogue that wraps things up and asks more questions.
So, wow, right from page 1, Aziz is saying, look, this is complicated. You can't just read a timeline. You need the history, the philosophy, the psychology, and the explicit political theory.
Exactly. It's a really multi-layered way of approaching it. He's signaling this isn't a simple story. You've got to look at all these different threads.
Which brings us nicely to the introduction, where he starts wrestling with those big, loaded words. Nation, nationality, nationalism. He doesn't shy away from saying they're tricky.
Oh, not at all. He calls them explosive, polemical, words that carry a ton of political weight. And he points out this paradox. They're incredibly hard to define clearly, whether you're a scholar or an activist.
Right.
But he says when nationalism really kicks in, people somehow know what they mean by it, and they're, willing to die for that meaning. It's quite stark.
He even gives some historical examples to show how the meaning of nation itself has shifted over time, doesn't he? Something about universities.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He mentions medieval universities like Prague or Oxford, where nations were just like groups of students from the same area. Oxford apparently used the River Trent to divide its student nations.
Just geographical groupings, basically.
Well, even guilds of craftsmen. So nation didn't originally mean a political state at all. But then he points to someone like Martin Luther.
How did Luther change it?
Well, Aziz says Luther started using nation to mean the political elite, the people with power, distinguishing them from the folk or common people. That's a big shift, right? Suddenly a nation is tied to political power.
Ah, okay. So it goes from just people from this place to the people running this place. And nationality is even more recent and maybe fuzzier.
Yeah, nationality emerges in the 19th century, and Aziz flags its ambiguity straight away. Does it mean a group hoping to be a nation? Or is it just that subjective feeling of belonging? He admits it's hard to pin down precisely.
So, given all this difficulty with definitions, what does Aziz actually land on as the core of nationalism? If it's not a neat definition, what is it?
Well, despite the definitional mess, he says there's a sort of substantial agreement that nationalism at its heart is a sentiment.
A feeling.
Yeah, a consciousness, a sympathy that connects people. It's that powerful desire of a group who feel they belong together, to live together, maybe even, die together under their own flag.
So it's less about ticking boxes on a checklist and more about something internal.
Exactly that. He uses these great analogies. He says, look, you know what a toothache feels like, right? Or love.
Yeah.
Or the smell of a rose. You know these things intimately, without needing a scientific definition.
Right, you just know it.
And for Aziz, nationalism is kind of like that. It's a state of mind, an
Mm.
intuition, an instinct, a conviction, he says, that can hit you in a flash.
Wow.
And he really drives home this non-rational aspect. He says people die for faith, and he puts nationalism in that category, but they rarely die for pure reason.
Yeah.
That really underscores this deep emotional power he sees at its core.
That idea is powerful nationalism as this strong, almost instinctive state of mind or faith. And this leads him to break it down further, right?
Yeah.
He lists 13 ingredients, beliefs that make up this creed of modern nationalism.
He does. It's quite a list, but he groups them helpfully. The first three are what he calls the emotional basis.
Okay, emotion first.
First, just that basic common group feeling, that sense of we're in this together, we belong.
Simple enough, the belonging part.
Second, love for fellow nationals.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily liking everyone personally, of course, but a kind of default solidarity. You see
Yeah.
it when people meet compatriots abroad, that instant connection.
Mm-hmm. That tendency to stick together.
Yeah.
And the third emotional one is a bit darker.
It is common hostility towards other groups. He's very direct about it. He says this hostility often ramps up depending on how threatened the group feels.
And he gives an example.
Yeah, the pre-1947 Indian Muslims looking with hostility towards Hindus and Sikhs, especially when feeling their identity or goals were under pressure. He notes it's pretty common where different groups live close together and feel insecure.
A stark reality of that emotional landscape. Okay, so after the emotional base, that's the next cluster, the political and social bits.
Right. The fourth point is common territory, either land you already have or land you desperately want. Aziz sees this as absolutely essential, the first step towards having a proper state.
The physical ground.
Yep. He mentioned the Muslims claiming the majority provinces in India, or the Jewish claim leading to Israel. Fifth is a common sovereign government, or, very importantly, the desire for one. Independence, freedom, that's the ultimate political goal.
Self-rule, basically.
And sixth, common moral, social, or economic institutions or ideas. Shared ways of life, shared beliefs, shared systems. These can bind people powerfully. He throws out examples like medieval Christianity, communism, even National Socialism or fascism as ideologies that unified groups.
Shared structures and the drive for independence.
Got it. What about the next group? He calls it the spiritual equipment.
Yeah, this feels deeper. Seventh is common cultural characteristics. Things like language, customs, literature, art, music, the whole cultural package. And Aziz actually calls this potentially the most lasting foundation for a nation. Culture as the bedrock. Makes sense.
Eighth is common religion. He acknowledges modern secularism often tries to downplay it, but look at the 20th century. He points directly to Pakistan and Israel as states where religion was undeniably a huge factor.
Can't ignore that one. What else is in this spiritual toolkit?
Ninth, common history or origin. And here's the interesting bit he stresses. It's the belief in a shared past, shared heroes, that matters, even if that history is, partly myth or selective telling.
So the story you tell yourself is about where you came from.
Exactly. He mentions how a sense of shared racial origin can fuel movements like Arab nationalism or Pan-Africanism. And 10th is common character, the idea that a group develops a sort of collective personality shaped by everything: geography, history, religion, culture.
Okay, so culture, religion, shared story, shared character. That's a lot. What are the last three? Something about time.
Yeah, linking past, present, and future. 11th is common pride in the nation's achievements and shared sorrow in its tragedies. It connects people to their collective past. Used to be mostly military glory, he notes, but now it could be scientific breakthroughs, economic success, anything.
Sharing the highs and lows.
12th is just simple devotion in the present. Unconditional loyalty, sometimes taken to the extreme of my country, right or wrong.
Present day loyalty. And the last one?
13th looks forward. Hope for future greatness, maybe expanding territory, becoming a military power, leading in science, whatever. a shared vision for where the nation is going.
A common destiny.
Right. And Aziz careful to say, look, these 13 aren't like a fixed recipe where you need all of them. They're ingredients. And different nationalisms mix them in different amounts.
That makes sense. It's not one size fits all. It's a dynamic mix. And finally, just briefly, he also talks about nationalism not just by its ingredients, but by the form it takes, like different aspects.
Yeah, it's another layer. He says nationalism can manifest as sentiment, that basic love for your place or culture.
Right.
Or it can be a policy, the practical push for independence or national security.
Okay.
It can be a myth, this almost mystical devotion to the idea of the nation itself. It could be a dogma, the belief that the nation is the highest good, the end-all be-all, or even a doctrine justifying why your nation should dominate others.
So these are like different faces nationalism can wear.
Exactly. Aspects, not strict definitions. And any real-world nationalism is probably a blend. Some are more about feeling, some more about hard policy, some lean heavily on myth.
And he has a specific warning about those myths, doesn't he?
He does. A really strong one. He basically says, don't ever underestimate the power of national myths. Even if they aren't strictly true, they can grip people so intensely.
Become real in their effects.
Precisely. And when a myth becomes that real, that powerful, it's like, in his words, a sword which few know how to sheath. It's a very potent cautionary image.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely sticks with you. Okay, so let's pull this all together. We've looked at Aziz's framework from the preface, his wrestling with definitions in the introduction, the 13 ingredients, these different aspects. What does all this groundwork give us, the listener, as we start this journey through his book?
Well, it gives us his analytical toolkit, doesn't it? He's shown us how he's going to dissect the making of Pakistan. He's not just telling a story. He's analyzing it through these specific lenses: nation, nationality, nationalism as sentiment, as policy, as myth.
Right.
Understanding that he sees nationalism as something deeply emotional, based on feeling, belief, maybe even non-rational conviction, alongside all the political stuff that's absolutely key to following his argument about Pakistan's origins.
It's like he's given us the reading glasses we need for the rest of the book. We see his multi-layered approach, the trouble with the key terms, his emphasis on sentiment and belief, and this whole shopping list of potential ingredients.
Exactly. It prepares you for a much richer and probably more challenging analysis than you might expect.
So here's a thought to leave you with, drawing on Aziz's point about nationalism being so much about feeling. If nationalism is more about feeling and belief than strict logic, how does that shape the stories nations tell about themselves? And what happens when those powerful stories collide?
That's a heavy question. Definitely something to keep in mind as we dive deeper